Hey YouTube, this is PrimetimePokemon. In this video, I'll be reviewing my Shiftry GX deck. This video is geared towards the competitive player and the 2019 Standard Format. This is actually the first deck that I reviewed for the 2019 Standard Format. Lots of good supporter cards as well as trainer cards have been rotated out, so a lot of the decks I've reviewed in the past no longer work. Now this deck actually took directly from Jesse on Twitter, a bit oddish. He posted a couple of different deck checklists on there, and I really seem to like this one. I've played quite a bit with this deck already. It's only been the 2019 Standard Format for a week or so, but I've had a lot of success with this deck. And with the 2019 Standard Format, it seems like decks are a lot slower to set up. So a deck like this, based on a lot of evolution Pokemon, is viable. So the remainder of this video will be laid out similar to all the other deck review videos that I've done. First, I'll give an overview of the strategy of this deck, then I'll show a deck checklist, and then I'll go through each and every card in this deck, stating why the card is in the deck, as well as how many cards I use. So as far as general strategy with this deck goes, ideally, you want to have two Zoroark GX set up on your bench, and then have Shiftry GX be your primary attacker. Shiftry can do up to 180 damage per turn, 210 damage if it has a choice band attached to it. With Extrasensory, as long as you have the same amount of cards in your hand as your opponent, it can essentially knock out 90% of the cards out there in one turn for only 2 energy cards. So I use Zoroark GX's trade ability as well as Judge and Copycat to modify the number of cards in my hand so that I'm always able to do 180 damage with Extrasensory. So that is my main attacking line, Shiftry GX. As far as secondary Pokemon go in this deck, I use Sceptile and Deoxys. Sceptile is used to shut down Ultra Beasts. It has an ability that says any of your Pokemon in play that have grass energy attached to them will not take damage from Ultra Beasts. And then I also use Deoxys, a Psychic type Pokemon, to go against Fighting type Pokemon like a Baby Buzzwole that is weak to Psychic type Pokemon. On the screen now you can see the deck checklist. 22 total Pokemon. I do rely heavily on rare candy, so that is why you'll see only 2 Nuzleaf and then not even 1 Grovyle in the deck. I just skipped from Trico to Sceptile. I use several trainer cards, 30 total, and like I mentioned, Copycat and Judge are solely to match the amount of cards in my hand with my opponent with Shiftry GX's Extrasensory move. Pokemon Fan Club has replaced Bridget in the 2019 Standard Format, and in my opinion is actually more useful because it allows you to use the abilities on your Pokemon you move to your hand. And then like I just mentioned, for rare candy as far as the item and tool cards go, I use several choice band. Things like Fighting Fury Belt have been rotated out. And then as far as energy cards, 4 each, Grass Energy and Double Colorless. The one negative with this deck is sometimes it is a little bit slow to set up, not only because there are a lot of evolution Pokemon, but with only 8 total energy, it is hard sometimes to get energy into your hand. But once Zoroark GX is set up, using its trade ability will allow you to quickly find cards that you need. So I'll get into showing the different cards in the deck, starting with the Pokemon. 22 total Pokemon cards in the deck. I'll start with the main attacking line, Seedot, Nuzleaf, and Shiftry GX. I use a 3-2-3 line of this Pokemon family. All 3 Pokemon are from Celestial Storm. I use 3 copies of Seedot. This is the one that has 60 HP. And if I'm forced to attack with this card, I can do 30 damage for only 1 double colorless energy. The card does have a fairly high retreat cost and is weak to Fire type Pokemon. At the moment, Fire type Pokemon are not that popular since things like Volcanion EX rotated out. But Kiawe, a very powerful supporter card, allows you to set up Fire type Pokemon very quickly. I use only 2 Nuzleaf, hoping to use Rare Candy to evolve Seedot into Shiftry GX, 90 HP, so a solid HP on Nuzleaf, 2 moves, Pound does 20 damage, and then Clear the Room for 2 colorless energy says your opponent reveals their hand. Choose a supporter card you find there. Your opponent shuffles that card into their deck. So maybe your opponent used Tapu Lele GX, its Wonder Tag ability, for some reason already used a supporter and then put in another one into their hand. You can have them shuffle that back into their deck. And then I used 3 copies of Shiftry GX, a very high HP on this card. It is a Stage 2 GX, so it should be a high HP, 240, a ×2 weakness to Fire-type Pokemon, and a 2 colorless energy retreat cost. 3 moves on this card. For only 1 grass energy, Perplex does 40 damage and confuses the defending Pokemon. Extrasensory for 2 energy cards does 90 damage, plus if you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent, this attack does 90 more damage. And then Den of Iniquity GX for 2 energy cards, 1 double colorless, 1 grass, says choose one of your opponent's Pokemon. Your opponent shuffles that Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. So that GX attack is very excellent, allowing you to choose any of your opponent's Pokemon in play and shuffle that Pokemon, all cards attached to it, into their deck. I was using this deck against a Rayquaza GX deck. A friend of mine had 3 energy cards on their Rayquaza, and then I shuffled that Rayquaza back into their deck. So a very powerful card overall, a high HP, and with the other supporting cards I have in this deck, Extrasensory can easily do 210 damage per turn with that choice band. So that is the main attacker in this deck. Next up would be a 1/1 line of Trico and Sceptile. Both cards are from the Celestial Storm set. I do not use Grovyle in this deck. I use a Rare Candy to skip the Stage 1 evolution. So this specific Trico has an HP of 70, an above average HP, and then 2 moves, Smack and Tail Whap, which do 10 and 20 damage respectively. This card does have a low retreat cost, which is useful, of only 1 colorless energy. It is also weak to Fire-type Pokemon. And then Sceptile. The main reason I have Sceptile in this deck is for its ability, which can be used from the bench. This is another Stage 2 Pokemon, 140 HP. It has an ability and then 1 move. It also has a low retreat cost of 1 colorless energy. Power of Nature, its ability, says prevent all damage done to your Pokemon that have any grass energy attached to them by attacks from your opponent's Ultra Beasts. And then Powerful Storm for 1 grass energy does 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to all of your Pokemon. So its ability, Power of Nature, like I mentioned in the open, can prevent damage from things like Buzzwole GX, Ultra Necrozma GX, Naganadel GX, a whole list of Pokemon out there that are very competitive. And then Powerful Storm, if you do have Shiftry GX set up and have a double colorless energy on it as well as a grass energy, Powerful Storm can do a lot of damage, and it can take down things like Zygarde GX, which is weak to grass type Pokemon. Next up would be Deoxys. I use 1 copy of Deoxys. It is the rare holo from Celestial Storm. 120 HP on this basic Psychic type Pokemon card. It is weak to Psychic type Pokemon, but it does have a low retreat cost of 1 colorless energy. The only move that I can use on this card is Psychic. For 1 double colorless energy, it does 20 damage plus 20 more damage times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So this is another card that is useful against fighting type Pokemon, and the more energy your opponent has on their active Pokemon, the more damage Deoxys can do. And a ×2 weakness on a lot of fighting type Pokemon will make this card be able to knock out a lot of Pokemon in only 1 move. And again, with Deoxys and Sceptile, very specific situations, you're going to want to use those cards in the active Pokemon spot. I do use a 4/4 line of Zoroark and Zoroark. The reason I use 4 and 4 is because I want to make sure to have at least 2 Zoroark GX set up on my bench so I can use multiple trade abilities to get the right number of cards in my hand to do 180 to 210 damage with Extrasensory. Plus, if I have 2 Zoroark GX set up on my bench, I can then discard with trade the extra Zoroark and Zoroark GX I have in my deck. Both cards are from Shining Legends. This Zoroark here has a solid HP of 60, 2 moves on it. Ram would be the only move that I could use in this deck. For 1 double colorless energy, it does 20 damage. It is weak to fighting type Pokemon, which is a little bit better because the standard format right now isn't as geared towards fighting type Pokemon. And it has a low retreat cost of 1 colorless energy. And then Zoroark GX, a very good HP on this card, 210. Its ability Trade says once during your turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. So that is a good way to not only get extra cards into your hand, but to modify the number of cards in your hand to use Extrasensory on Shiftry GX. And then Riotous Beating for 1 double colorless energy does 20 damage for each of your Pokemon in play. So this move can do up to 120 damage per turn. This is a 2-hit knockout type of card. And then the last Pokemon I have in this deck would be Tapu Lele GX. I used 3 copies of this card from the Guardians Rising set. I use this card solely for its ability Wonder Tag. When you move this card from your hand to your bench, you can search your deck for a supporter card. A lot of times I'll use this ability to go and get either Cynthia or Guzma. And then Energy Drive on this card you can use for 1 double colorless energy. It does 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. The card also has a low retreat cost of 1 colorless energy, and it does not have a weakness. So that is it for the Pokemon. I can get to the trainer cards now. 30 total trainer cards in the deck, 16 supporters, and then 14 item/tool cards. I do use 3 copies of Copycat. This is from the Celestial Storm set. It says, shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw a card for each card in your opponent's hand. This card works perfectly with Extrasensory on Shiftry GX. So I can also use Tapu Lele GX to go and get this supporter card and mash the number of cards in my opponent's hand. I rotate between using this card and Judge, just depending on how many cards my opponent does have in their hand. Next up here would be Cynthia. 3 copies of this card, a very popular supporter card out there. This is from Ultra Prism. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. This is even better than N and Professor Sycamore, which have both been rotated out. Guzma would be next. 3 copies of this card. Switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. If you do, switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. This is from Burning Shadows. And this is a great way to not only get rid of 1 card in your hand, but maybe to switch Shiftry GX into the active Pokemon spot, as well as something on your opponent's bench that is set up and ready to attack. Also, with Floatstone being rotated out, this card becomes even more useful. Next up would be Judge. I use 3 copies of this card. This card is from Forbidden Light. Each player shuffles their hand into their deck and draws 4 cards. So this is a supporter that works very closely with Shiftry GX again. Depending on how many cards my opponent has in their hand, I will either use Judge or Copycat. Another good way to get more cards into your hand or really refresh your hand. This is a simplified version of N, just because N is based on the number of prize cards each player has. I use 2 copies of Pokemon Fan Club. This one is from Ultra Prism. It says, search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon, reveal them and put them into your hand. Then shuffle your deck. So a lot of times I'll want to use this supporter the first turn of the game and get a couple of Zoroark on my bench, or maybe something like Tapu Lele GX. But the important thing here, moving it to your hand first, that way you can utilize an ability when it is placed from your hand to the bench. I use 1 copy of Malo, which can be used with Zoroark GX's trade ability. This is from Guardians Rising and says, search your deck for 2 cards. Shuffle your deck, then put those cards on top of it in any order. So you can use Malo first and then get the exact 2 cards you want in your hand with trade. And then the final supporter card would be Acerola. This is from Burning Shadows. Put one of your Pokemon that has any damage counters on it and all cards attached to it into your hand. This is from Burning Shadows, and it is very important to use with high HP Pokemon like a Zoroark GX or a Shiftry GX. A lot of Pokemon won't be able to do 240 damage in a turn, so you can get 200 damage, let's say, on Shiftry GX and heal it completely, just moving it back into your hand with Acerola. Next up would be the item and tool cards, 14 of these types of cards in the deck. First up would be Rare Candy. Celestial Storm has Rare Candy in the set. 4 copies of this card. You place this card in play, and then you can skip an evolution line on a Pokemon. So you can skip directly from Trico to Sceptile, for example, or go from Seedot to Shiftry GX. So very useful and very helpful in this deck. It makes the deck a lot faster to set up. I use 4 copies of Ultra Ball. This says to discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck. So if you have Rare Candy in your hand already, you can go and find Sceptile or Shiftry GX. Maybe you want to use this card to go and get Tapu Lele GX, or if you're trying to get less cards into your hand, you can use Ultra Ball, discard 2 cards, and not actually add a Pokemon into your hand at all. Choice Band is next. I use 3 copies of this card from Guardians Rising. It is a Pokemon tool. You attach this to a Pokemon, and when attacking, it does 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon GX or EX. So like I mentioned, with Shiftry GX, it can do 210 damage per turn against a GX card. Field Blower would be next. I use 2 copies of this card. Choose up to 2 in any combination of Pokemon tool cards and stadium cards in play, and discard them. A lot of stadium cards are being used right now, like a Shrine of Punishment or something like Brooklet Hill. And then Rescue Stretcher, I use 1 copy of this card from the Guardians Rising set. It allows you to either put a Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand, or shuffle 3 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck. So if you're close to losing the game by running out of cards, you can use Rescue Stretcher, or if Trico gets knocked out early, you can go and get that Pokemon again. So lots of different options with Rescue Stretcher. So there's a look at the trainer cards. So last up would be the energy cards. I only use 8 total energy cards in this deck, mainly because double colorless energy works on so many of the attacking Pokemon in the deck. Now if your opponent has Enhanced Hammer, that can hurt you, especially because Puzzle of Time has been rotated out. So I do use 4 copies of Grass Energy, and then 4 copies of double colorless energy. So there is a look at my Shiftry GX deck. Well, actually, it's Jesse's deck from A Bit Oddish. I'm just doing a deck profile on the deck that he created. But again, very excited to get more into the 2019 standard format. And again, if you do have suggestions for me on decks you'd like me to review, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm very glad to have found this deck. I think it will have lots of potential in the future, especially if Fire-type Pokemon are not that popular. This deck will really not have any weaknesses out there. It shuts down Ultra Beasts, it can take down Fighting-type Pokemon, and then it can really take out most Pokemon in one turn with Shiftry GX's Extrasensory move. So if you're looking for a high-hitting deck that may take a little bit of time to set up, but is very fun to play, modifying your hand each and every turn to match your opponents, this is a great deck for you. So that concludes this video. Thanks everyone for watching. As always, before you go, make sure to check out all the links in the description of this video, including links to my blog, Facebook, and Twitter pages. And I will be creating a new playlist for all the deck review videos that I do for the 2019 standard format. So thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.